So my kids and I have this thing that we like to do where we go on Disney Plus, like if we're trying to find something to watch, and instead of finding something to watch, we just watch trailers forever. It doesn't matter if they're trailers for shows and movies that we've already seen or ones that are upcoming. Our favorites are the ones that like really pique our interest, and we will legitimately watch them over and over and over again. And it got me thinking, students look at the way we open lessons and units the same way that my kids and I look at trailers. The gateway activity is basically the trailer for what's to come in the classroom. And if it falls flat, that's the one that we're not going to finish, right? Like we're not going to finish watching that trailer. I have already lost most of our students before we even start.
Which is why we care so much about it. And so one of our very favorite strategies that we want to share with you right now is a gateway activity using picture books. Picture books are the perfect little intro to big concepts and themes. They're engaging in a way that's unexpected. Here's a fun fact. We have a whole lesson ready made for you and absolutely free to download that uses the book Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. And we use it to introduce the genre of dystopia and all of the big ideas within it. So if you've ever been in the market for tricking and deceiving your students with something that's really engaging and fun, this is the lesson for you. Every single time we use Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs in the classroom, students are walking away intrigued. They're talking to each other. They're talking out the door about what happened in class. I mean, dreams really do come true. And they're thinking about what's coming the next day. All of these signs of a very successful gateway lesson.
And did we mention that the whole lesson is free? You can go and download it right now and come back to it whenever you are ready. Head to the show notes for this episode or go to shop.bravenewteaching.com/cloudy to download this lesson today. We can't wait to see how it works in your classroom. This episode is brought to you by Curriculum Rehab by us, the team here at Brave New Teaching. It is the first and only teacher PD of its kind, a course to help teachers like you by guiding you through creating your own personal framework for curriculum. You make it work for you, your students, and your unique situation because nobody else knows what the kiddos in your classroom need the way that you do. Curriculum Rehab takes all of the resources available to you, all of the lessons, the assessments, the activities, all of the texts, everything that could possibly be there for you, and it helps you organize what you actually need in order to attain your teaching objectives. These are the strategies that Amanda and myself have used in our own classrooms, have developed over very long years of teaching and figuring things out, combined together to create this framework and these strategies that we can guide you through. This course will give you the tools you need for a complete curriculum overhaul or to start from scratch. Wherever you are on that continuum, it does it all for you and with you on your timeline. So start today, do a little bit more in a couple of months, and then pick it up next summer. It's Teacher PD the way it should be on your own time. Head to curriculumrehab.com/course for more information, or just head to the show notes for this episode. We cannot wait to see you there. It's finally time to take control of what goes on in your own classroom and create the curriculum of your dreams. All right, let's get back into the show.
Well, hello and welcome back to Brave New Teaching. Teachers, fellow lovers of the written word, we are so excited to have you back again this week. You are joining us in the midst of an epic summer camp, and we are calling this Camp BNT, Camp Brave New Teaching. And if this is your first episode of the series, you need to know that you should definitely go through and listen to today's episode, but there is more where this came from and there's more coming. We sat down with 7 authors this summer to talk to them about their books, their process, how they categorize and genre-ify their books. And we really talked to authors in light of both their experience writing and the ideation of their stories, but also about how these stories can exist in our classrooms, what books they can go alongside, if they're going to go into a lit circle unit, if they're going to go into the classroom library, if they're going to be the centerpiece of a novel unit. There are so many different ways that we can imagine these stories in our classrooms. And it's really important to Marie and I that we center new and contemporary voices. And everyone we're talking to, today's author included, is a fresh voice speaking to the kids that we teach right where they are. Part of the mission of Brave New Teaching is to meet kids where they are. And part of my mission when I go and do professional development with teachers is to meet teachers where they are. And that is what this podcast is doing. We're trying to be here with you in the summer, inspiring you and reminding you why you love teaching and why you love education, and specifically teaching books and teaching writing. If you have not already done so, please, 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 today go to our show notes, or you can go directly to bravenewteaching.com/camp. This is where you are going to join us. We have a Facebook group. We have a workbook. We have some really adorable coloring sheets that you can use for all of your summer reading. And you can download the full list of our authors, their interview dates, when every episode's going to go live. And really, I think that the key piece of bravenewteaching.com/camp is downloading this workbook. This workbook is a great way for you to kind of reflect on your practice and follow along with the episodes and think through some questions as you're listening to our conversations with these incredible authors. And today we are talking with Erin H. Aceves. And I was the one that got to talk to Erin. Marie she was in the throes of theater season when this interview took place. And I just had such a delightful conversation with Erin. And if you've not read Erin's work yet, we are talking about the novel, This Is Why They Hate Us. And it is such a raw, honest, and like visceral story. And I really loved listening to it in particular. And Erin is a bisexual Mexican-American writer. He was born and raised in East LA. He graduated from Harvard and he received his MFA from Columbia. And his fiction has appeared it's in a lot of places, but you can find it in Passages North, Epiphany, the Iowa Review. He's currently living in Texas. And when we talked to him, he was sharing a lot about his experience there teaching creative writing at UT Austin. And so it was really cool to speak to not only an author, but an author who teaches writing. It was very, very cool chat. So you're going to love this interview. You're going to love this book. It's received multiple starred reviews. It was named a best young adult book of 2022. And I believe in our interview, I do talk about how I found Erin. Erin had made this hysterical comment on a reel that I saw about Target, I think. And it was about how the characters go to Target. It was a piece. I was just, his sense of humor that I saw from him as an author on social media was definitely what piqued my interest in reading his work. And it tracks. Erin's work is light and funny, but also really reflective and serious and big. And so that dynamic really is what attracted me to picking up his book and then getting a hold of him for an interview. So we did that. We have it for you right here. I think you guys are going to love this chat, and you're really going to love this story and adding it to your collection of new works to share in your teaching experience wherever you might be. So I hope that you enjoy today. Head to bravenewteaching.com/camp to get all the goodies you need. And now it's time to cue the music. You're listening to Brave New Teaching, and we are so much more than a podcast.
We give teachers the inspiration, support, and tools to challenge the status quo.
I'm Amanda, and I'm a former English teacher from Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm a high school teacher from Southern California.
Join us after the show and happy hour to extend your BNT experience with instant access to our resources, workshops, and courses.
Visit shop.bravenewteaching.com/happy hour to join us today. We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show.
Everyone, thank you and welcome. We're so happy to have you here. Erin Aceves is with us to talk about his book. But Erin, I want you first just to introduce yourself to our Brave New Teaching teachers. Welcome.
That was my cat. I don't know if you heard that.
Yes, we produced your cat as well.
Well, he was introducing himself. His name is Echo. But yeah, my name is Aaron H. Aceves. I'm the author of This Is Why They Hate Us, which is a young adult novel. And I'm also a creative writing professor at UT Austin, technically an early career provost fellow is a position. But yeah, I'm from LA, currently living in Austin because of this job, and happy to be here.
Oh, we're so happy to have you. And I'm sure as a creative writing professor, you and an author, YA is having its moment. I feel like we're living in the glory years of incredible. What does it feel like to be part of this YA movement? I mean, it's just so incredible.
It's interesting. I'm a very nostalgic person. And so when I think of YA, I sort of think of like maybe around 2016 or, like I think around when I was in college. So anywhere from 2012 to like 2015. But, I think about like John Green and like Hunger Games and like all that sort of classic stuff. But I also, at this point, I think it's so beautiful that we have so much diversity, like so many demographics are represented now, and we're getting to sort of more and more people. And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
It's so amazing. I'm in an adult book club, and our favorite books that we've read over the past 2 years, I would say, like in our top 5, there are at least 3 that are YA. I mean, it's a whole incredible era, and the diversity is just so powerful. And I think that really lends itself to our conversation today, because we really wanted to talk to you about how your novel really tackles these ideas of identity and those internalized, ideas about homophobia, finding your voice. I mean, I feel like your novel, and Enrique, right? It tackles everything. So, can you kind of walk us through your story, first of all, because not all of our listeners have read through it. Some of them are wondering, is this something that I should be paying attention to? Walk us through your story and talk to us about this idea of identity and how Kike is looking for it.
Yeah. So Enrique is 17 years old. He's a junior in high school. He's bisexual. He's Mexican. He's only out to himself and to his best friend, Fabiola. He has a crush on his best friend, and it sort of, plagues him in the way that can happen at that age. And so when this best friend leaves on summer vacation, he sort of sets about trying to get over him, by looking to other boys at school to see if they can sort of fill the void that his best friend Celine left. And it's, yeah, like I didn't really think about what to put into it. It just happened, right? So like the first time I sat down to start writing the book, I heard this kid's inner monologue in my head. And so, we'll just get into it. The book is about like him discovering his sexuality and exploring that. And so let's start the way that I started with the book, which was him thinking, my mom calls it playing with yourself, which is indisputably the worst name for it. And I just immediately, with that one line, I just knew who he was, right? Like I sort of had this kid in mind. We share a lot, but he's Gen Z. He has 2 great parents instead of just one. He has no siblings. Like in all these ways, like he was different from me, and I knew that, so I could sort of focus on what he was going through. But also in a lot of ways, it was just what I was going through at the time. I started writing the book when I was 24, and I was sort of a late bloomer. I came out very late. I, hadn't really had a lot of experiences with romance, and so I was sort of filtering it through a 17-year-old because I figured that Gen Z sort of has more access to resources that would help them figure stuff out more quickly, and that he would sort of be doing that and pursuing it a little recklessly, for sure. And yeah, so like his Mexicanness was just a part of me, filtering that in through him. His bisexuality, his mental illness, all these things were things that I was dealing with, and not very well at the time. But I sort of wanted to create a narrative where he found more stability and found more sort of self-care.
He did, and he does it with such a truly unique and raw sense of humor and dark sense of humor. I
Yeah.
was very struck by that as a teacher. Like, I know that kid. I know that that coping mechanism is not every kid. Like, that was such a unique part of his voice. Do you also share a dark sense of humor with Enrique?
Oh, for sure. Like that's I mean, that's something I've never had a choice in. I think it's my family tradition is like everything becomes a joke no matter how sad or tragic or dark it is. So I've always had that in me. And then I just really like I don't know how people exist without that like coping mechanism. I guess maybe there are healthier ones, maybe there are unhealthier ones that people use, but I couldn't get through each day without joking about it. And I before my book ever came out, I think I had written it, but I remember reading Adam Silvera's More Happy Than Not
Uh-huh.
and sort of seeing like, oh, there is room for my book on the shelf because he does the same thing. He deals with the absolute, scariest things in life and with humor and with heart. And I was like, that's what I want to do. And, I'm not going to give up because it is possible to do that.
Oh my gosh, there's no doubt. And I think that from as I know you're a creative writing professor, right? And as a teacher of writing, I feel like that's something that's very, very hard to teach. And mostly I find it's because there are very few models, especially
Mm,
for teenagers to see that humor's okay. Humor's not all the same. I thought it was just, I mean, personally, I thought I was thinking of so many like individual students that I'm like, I want to hand you this book because you'll
mm.
finally see yourself. And I know we're going to get to that. I don't want to get ahead of it, but I'm also kind of curious about this journey of self-discovery that this book really takes the readers on. I mean, what are you really hoping that young people who read it take away from this story?
Yeah, so I knew I didn't want to write a book where he discovers his sexuality. I wanted him to know, from the jump that he is bi. And I wanted him to have come out to himself and I wanted him to come out to, at least one other person that he could talk about it without shame. And then I just wanted him to come out at the end with self-love, this, just this stable internal, sort of validation. But I also what was critical was his feeling that he deserved love from other people, because I do think we always start with people always push you to like love yourself, and I think that's great and that is, what's going to pull you through most things. But I think they sort of dismiss that humans are so social and that we kind of, I don't want to say need people because I want someone who's like totally on their own to like feel like they can do that. They're stranded on a deserted island or something. But like we're pack animals, like we're
Yeah.
just, anytime I'm sort of ranting to a best friend or friend or whatever, I'm sort of like, yeah, no, I needed this. Like this isn't something that I want to take for granted. And so with Kiki, I just wanted the readers to see themselves in him and sort of be like, oh, not only do I love myself, but like other people should love me. Like I am worthy of that, even if I'm messy, even if I'm, if I disappoint them. Sometimes it's like we're all human, but I do deserve all these other types of love, platonic, familial, romantic. Like I want them to feel like they deserve that. And then, yeah, so it's like self-love, love from other people, and I think, yeah, just sort of embracing the messiness of being a teenager, or, I get so many older readers who are still in that phase. And it's, a lot of queer readers because we didn't have the chance to sort of explore that in high school, or maybe I didn't have the chance to explore it in college, really. And so we do sort of have that later coming of age. And I think embracing the messiness of whenever you're coming of age, like, making these mistakes and, again, not hating yourself for it.
And the story that you've written is so raw and I'm gonna say this with love, like it's untidy. Like the writing's not untidy, but like Kike's story is not this, kind of predictable, linear, we put all the punctuation at the end of all the sentences. Like
Mhm.
he has the self-love journey, but it's got its own little cycles, right? Like in and out of
Mhm.
therapy, in and out of understanding his classmates, his family, and like making a decision and then going back on his decision. I mean,
Yeah.
that's so human. And like that human aspect of the story was both like infuriating because I was like, oh my gosh, come on, Kiki, you can do it. Like I
Yeah.
was cheering for him, but like it was so even the ending, which I'm not going to spoil for anybody, I thought was exactly what I wanted, but it also wasn't manufactured, right? It was also
Mm.
realistic. I think the way that it's not self love in a corny way. It's self love in a darkly humorous way, and in a messy, just like you said, in a messy way. I really want to help teachers as we kind of move into the rest of this conversation. I really want to think about like the classroom aspect. You said about finding stories. There's a whole scene. There are multiple scenes actually at libraries and in the classroom talking about books and about finding stories. Enrique's looking for stories that are written by queer authors or about queer students, and they're hard for him to come by. And I'm wondering about your thoughts about inclusive classrooms and what teachers can do to create inclusive classrooms where kids feel safe to talk about what they need to say. How do you think teachers can start taking those first steps?
I don't want to sit here and sort of, I don't know what the word for is, maybe mansplain, but like, sort of be like, this is how you do it, because I've actually never been in an actual high school or middle school. I've never been in that classroom environment. I teach creative writing at the university level. And so it's very different, right? Like you have these kids who are technically adults and who want to act like adults. And it's much easier to sort of be who I am. But I do think that is the core of it, is me being open and how that affects my students, and people don't realize this, like, Texas got rid of all of its DEI initiatives, and they don't realize that like my presence in a classroom unlocks other people's freedoms in the classroom. And it's really interesting too. We're doing this interview about a week after my first class of this semester, and I failed at something, which I usually do very well at. And so for my first three classes, or the first 3 years that I ever taught, I would start out by giving my life story. And I would typically hit on the point where I'm like, I went into college straight and pre-med, and when I left, I was neither of those things, right? And I usually touch on that and sort of give, if any student is queer, like it sort of gives them a little bit more freedom. I think like they'll feel more safe. Talk about like my Mexican background, and sometimes the students of color feel more safe for that. And I sometimes talk about my struggles with mental illness, and like being open about all this sort of, I think, opens them up to be themselves as well. Because then I ask for their life stories. But like I was saying, like this year, I didn't fully express myself, and I omitted the fact that I was queer, and I omitted a lot of stuff that I usually didn't because of the makeup of the class. Typically, I have a lot of young ladies, some of whom are queer, and then I'll have maybe one or two queer boys. Like that's typically the makeup of my classes because of who I draw and because of what I teach. But this year, I had three presumably straight bros. And I feel grown at this point, I think, mostly. Like I'm almost 32, and I feel like confident in myself. But for a moment, I was back to being that kid who didn't fully accept himself. And I glossed over what I usually talk about and include. And the reason I see it as a failure is because I had a student in office hours 2 days later, come in and talk to me and say, oh, well, when I was giving my life story, like I wanted to talk about my own queerness, but I didn't. And I don't know why. And in my head, I was like, it's because you didn't. And I was like, you're the teacher, you're the leader, you're supposed to, and I think people will sort of tell you sometimes, like, you didn't fail. I'm totally fine with failure, right? Like that to me is a failure, and I will not reframe that so that I feel better. It's just a reminder to me to like, hey, you're the leader, right? Like you're the instructor, you're the one who they're all looking at when you're talking. Like you can, or you should, be as open as you have been in the past, because it really does make teaching so much easier. Like every class, I spend the entire class, everyone just tells me about where they're from, what books they love growing up, like how college has been. Like I want that from them so that I know them better. And one of the dude bros that I was, very like Tyler from the book. He was very Tyler
Yes.
vibes,
Yes.
but
Okay.
he was like, I read murder mystery novels with my girlfriend in our free time. And I was like, that's adorable. And like I
It's
saw
really
him,
cool.
like, it endeared me to him. And I was like, oh, I'm so glad I did this, because I was prejudging him a little bit. And I'm glad that I got to know them. And, going forward, I'm like, I have to sort of go back a little bit and be like, hey, by the way, like this is my life experience. This is what I care about. Although they probably will get that with the reading list and everything. But yeah, I just, hopefully that can be achieved in a high school classroom, or maybe just having like the selection of books might be a tell.
So if I could distill from what you just said, I really think that the first thing is something that we are totally in agreement with. And that is something that we've taught here on the podcast before. And I think our teachers have heard. What you are describing to me is number one, the willingness to be vulnerable. I
Mhm.
think that when the educator, and I think willingness to be vulnerable is different for everyone. Like, I think you kind of have to define what that is. But when you are the first
Mhm.
to set the tone for vulnerability, the faster and the more authentically I think students will follow. And I think a classroom that is rooted in vulnerability or in building the confidence to become a vulnerable person,
Mhm.
um, I mean, that to me is like the gateway for empathy, for deep conversations, for self discovery, and for really getting past the to do list that I think
Mhm.
school can feel like. And I think that that's really huge. And then I think number two is also something we believe in too is honest self reflection. Whether you want to frame it in failure, you want to frame it in another way. I think that a lot of educators that I know and I work with feel so attacked all the time that to be self-critical can sometimes be really hard.
Mhm.
But I think the way you expressed it was just so beautiful in that it's really about yourself and your own kind of figuring out where you are in the continuum of yourself and right who you are
Mhm.
and the kind of classroom like in your immediate right door closed, this room, these people, who am I,
Mhm.
checking on that person is really important on a regular basis. And I think you really nailed that. Am I right? Did I mischaracterize any of that?
You definitely did not mischaracterize. I do think my thoughts do need distillation a lot of the time, and so I'm glad you did that. I also go off on tangents, and
Oh
I
my
am a
gosh.
I'm a writer, so I like to illustrate everything through story. So it's not that I
Oh.
can like say like these are my thoughts. It's more like I'm going to tell you the story, and then you can tell the very obvious lesson that I learned from it, right? So it's you know.
I don't think it was obvious at all. I was really trying to think about like, your experience in the college level. And then I think that the high school level, I think our levels are
Mhm.
really close together. And I think that teachers sometimes need a reminder that that piece of your humanity is one of the biggest pieces of being successful in your work. And I
Mhm.
think that that's in our current environment, like you're talking about with DEI being taken away in your state. I mean, it's a lot easier said than done. It's scary. There are real repercussions, like real threats to teachers
Mhm.
who feel like they can or feel like they once at one point were able to share and now feel like they need to be more closed off. It's scary. So I think it's really reassuring to hear that this conversation is a real one and it's a real struggle. So I think that this kind of segues into the next one, which maybe we're just going to brainstorm together. I don't certainly don't expect you to have the answer, but I looked at Enrique and we'll kind of go back to the stories. He finds so much solace in reading Picture of Dorian Gray. He loves reading Dorian Gray. He's looking for more stories. We are finding more stories. You're part of that. You're part of we just read one of our favorites in book club that we had just finished maybe not too long ago was Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School.
Oh yeah,
We
Sonara
loved
is a friend. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, and this is so for context, this book club is like 38 to 45-year-old cisgendered heterosexual women. I mean, we loved it. And so
Mhm.
that all that is to say is like I don't even think that these stories are only for kids and only for queer kids at all.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
all of that, right? So what do we do with the classroom? Right? How are we going to move forward sharing stories that absolutely must be told while also facing parents, other
Yeah.
educators, other voices that feel like there are red flags or inappropriateness. Like how are some of the ways that you've kind of negotiated through that in your conversations with either what other YA authors or just in your own work with publishing and writing? I mean, where do we go from here with all these wonderful stories that we have? Where do they go?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big question.
I know.
I
Sorry.
think yeah, no, you're totally fine. I think so the thing I want to start off with is like keeping in mind that for teens, especially queer teens, but not just queer teens, like isolation and feelings of being alone are so dangerous, right? Like I felt completely utterly alone when I was, figuring out, or just when I could feel my queerness sort of coming on around age 12 or 13, up until, college. Like that feeling of isolation really made me feel like there was no point in living. And, mental illness and suicidal ideation is covered in this book. And it's a direct result of that, of feeling like there is no one like me. Where do I go? And, for a while in the book, it's, family isn't an option. Friends aren't enough because, they're equally young and not knowing what's going to happen too. So Kika has a much better support system than I did, but, he feels alone and lonely. And so that's why he does go to books, right? And The Picture of Dorian Gray, Giovanni's Room, Morris, Call Me by Your Name, which is, talked about within the book. Like within my book, it's taken apart for its problematic elements, but also recognizing that I read that and I was like, oh my God, like this is so me, right? So finding this company, this solace in books was a lifeline for me. And I think it will always be, right? So I don't really know ways to do that in the classroom besides what we talked about, sort of being open and maybe, yeah, just like having the books available and sort of, I've talked to students who are like figuring stuff out. And if it's something I don't have experience with, like I'm not trans, right? Like I don't know what that experience is like, but I can say, read Too Bright to See by Kyle Lukoff, right? Read Pet by Kweke Emezi. Read, I book recs are my way of sort of being like, I don't know what you're going through. You can always tell me, you can listen, I can listen, but maybe this person is the person that you relate to and that can help. So if like, I don't really know solutions, but I think what I really want to stress is the importance of doing it, because I don't know what it's like to have a school board against me. I don't know what it's like to have parents, sort of coming up against me. The only thing I really know is when students sort of push back against you. And I welcome that. I tell them I'm not a dictator. I'm not always right. I'm just, they did hire me for a reason. I do know mostly what I'm talking about, but I'm also not the be all end all. And so, I mean, there was one instance where I totally disagreed with a student, but I'm glad she felt able to speak up. She did say like, she didn't like that the books I had were depressing and trans and from Black and Latino authors and from queer authors and everything. Like she was like, I would never let my kids read this. And that's really sad. So I just know what that is like, what that kind of pushback of, it just made me be like, okay, well, I'm not going to stop doing that. So I'm glad you expressed yourself about that, but that's not going to change what I do. And again, they did hire me. And so I am going to do what I want. So I think it's just knowing the importance of that and doing, what you feel is right. And I don't know, it's just, it is, I sort of want to end this thought on a positive note, but I don't know if I can. And I think that's okay. I think the feeling
Don't need to fabricate it. I get it.
Yeah, I think that feeling of like, I will deal with it as it comes, but I will do my best to remain true to myself. Like, I think just knowing that we're doing that for younger people who represent us in a way.
I think you've done the hardest part, right? Which is adding another voice to the story. I mean, another voice to the story, another voice to the canon, right? Of these incredible stories that are coming out. I mean, I think that the hardest part is having enough stories to fill the shelves, right?
Yeah.
And when there are few, I think it's easier to push them to the side. And so I'm so happy to have more. Do you have other authors that kind of either inspire you or you would add to that, the list of other authors and stories that are doing the work for, kind of this population of students and then the rest of us who need to hear these voices too?
Yeah, there's so many and they're all crowding my brain right now, but I think I'll talk about I'll talk about Jackie Kalalia. She's a Palestinian YA author. Her first book is called Something More, and it's I'm going to get into a whole thing. Maybe I love fantasy books. They're not the things I read most, but I do. I love fantasy books. I love when people of color and queer people can be in these fantasy books, and it's nothing about racism. It's nothing about homophobia, queerphobia. But those are the books that have, I think, a larger reach and a lot more commercial success. And I'm such a contemporary writer. I'm such a contemporary reader as well. And so I think it's so important for, these marginalized voices to just be in everyday situations where they get to be kids. And that's what Something More is. It's about a Palestinian girl living in Canada who is in a love triangle, like a contemporary high school love triangle. There's the best friend that she is getting closer to, and then there's the dreamy boy. And we've talked about this, where she was sort of like, she got a lot of pushback from editors who were like, she's boy crazy. And it's like, yeah, and like, she's a 16-year-old girl, and it's
I was
like,
like, have you not met a 16-year-old girl?
yeah, and like I got that with Kike too, and I did get a good note from it early on in the draft. There was another character who doesn't exist now, who was another sort of prospect for Kike, and someone said, like, I would love to see him interact with a boy that he doesn't have a crush on. And I was like, you're right, actually, like, I want to show that. But even with all the other ones, like, I've still gotten the accusation of like, all he cares about is this. And it's like, yeah, typically when you're human and you're dealing with really big things, you distract yourself with what other people think are smaller things. So I love Something More. I didn't mention Case and Colander, but they wrote Felix Ever After, which is one of my favorite trans rom-coms. My friend Johnny Garcia is a great writer, and I love 1500 Miles from the Sun. Adam Silvera I already mentioned, and he's also very popular. But my favorite book from him is More Happy Than Not. It's not anything from the They Both Die at the End series. Elizabeth Acevedo I mentioned. I Teach Her. Speak by Lori Halse Anderson, I think I think everyone already has that, because that was like, to me, that's like it's not the first YA book, obviously, but it's the first one where it's sort of so integrated into high school culture, and it's so important for boys to read. It's obviously important for girls to read, and I think they're the target audience, but it's so important for boys to read that book. But yeah, I think I can keep going, but I'll stop there.
Well, and as joked about in the book, we read with a certain lens, maybe The Outsiders. I'm telling you, Erin, I cackled out loud so hard at the joke about Pony Boy. I was dying. That was amazing. Maybe your most brilliant moment of the whole novel. The listeners of the podcast know that there are a lot of people who love teaching The Outsiders, and I've always kind of been it's not my favorite. So to have like that kind of knock on the door was just hilarious. I thought it was really funny.
Yeah, with The Outsiders, I know S.E. Hinton has been sort of very resistant against anyone saying that, those characters are queer. So I'm not like a huge proponent of that, but I haven't read it yet, but Tobley McSmith has a book called Stay Gold, which I think is an Outsiders retelling, or is sort of, and I haven't read it, but I remember seeing that come out before my book came out, and I was like, that's so cool, because The Outsiders is a formative YA book, but for a lot of people
teach that a lot of times in middle school, but now I want them to teach it at like 11th and 12th grade with a queer lens, and like, let's talk about it. We talk about this with Gatsby too, with Nick and Gatsby, for sure. I mean, there are lots of really good critical reading studies out there and theories about. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about right now, because then we'd be here for another half an hour. Erin, what are you working on next?
So I'm currently not working on anything. I'm in the process. I'm in that writerly process of trying to sell things and get people to give me money for my work. But one of the things that I have on submission is a second YA novel. It's a proposal so far. So I've only written the first third of it, but I know exactly what I want to do with it if someone buys it. It's about high school journalism, which I was obsessed with in high school. And I know this really hard battle to sell this book is a lot of people, and they're mostly right, like, print journalism isn't really a thing in high schools anymore. But I talked with the advisor of the newspaper at my old high school, and she's trying to bring it back. She's trying to get these kids interested in it. And I was like, well, maybe like I can help with that. Maybe I can sort of put it in these kids' heads, like, hey, like, I want a newspaper at our school. Or if they do have it, like, sort of be like, oh, like, I'm so lucky to have this. Because again, it was formative for me. I jokingly call it like teen Succession, because it's about sort of a cutthroat environment where they want to be editor-in-chief. And I think what's really important about it is it's going to more accurately represent my sexuality in high school, which was a big question mark that I swept under the rug while having, crushes on girls and knowing that felt right, but there was something else I wasn't acknowledging. And so I would be really excited to release that book and sort of be like, hey, this is why they hate us wasn't my experience in high school. This is, and both are just like equally valid and okay ways of exploring yourself. But yeah, we'll see.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. So, listeners, if you have a newspaper or you are wanting a newspaper at your school, they're going to send you a DM. They're going to find you on Instagram, and you're going to get a whole bunch of little blurbs from people that say, yes, we need this book. Because I would love that book. We had a big newspaper at the school I was most recently, actually, both schools that I was at, and it was like a cornerstone. Like it was almost at the point where it got a little exclusive, and it was supposed to be an elective that anybody could join, but it was like it was a very insider's edition kind of a newspaper. But that's awesome. We'll get you some backing on that. There's plenty, and some of them are dying, but I think that doesn't mean that we can't have a revival. I'm all about that. And I do want to ask, kind of before we close, what is one thing that you wish every English teacher, or even just every teacher, knew? Like, what is one thing you really wish that they had to carry with them into their classroom this week? When they're listening, what do you wish that they knew?
I think what I want English teachers to know is just that they can have such a huge impact on their students, good or bad. I make it a joke. Like in my book, there's an English teacher, and it's kind of become a YA contemporary joke about how the English teacher is always the helpful English teacher, the one that the kids confide in. And I love that. And I take it to an extreme in my book, and I don't recommend anyone modeling themselves after the people in this book. It's purely for the purposes of fiction that he's able to be, this mentor. But yeah, I remember Miss Harbison, 9th grade. She had us write poetry. She had us write and film commercials based on the Greek myths. So me and my friends came up with the Kronos 3000, which is a time machine remote that you could use.
Oh, my word.
She had us do a deleted scene. I wrote it. I ended up writing it because I was the writer. She had us write a deleted scene from Tale of Two Cities that we had to act out as a play. Mr. Gonzalez, 10th grade, he was the theater guy, the theater teacher, and he and English. And so he had us parody stories from 1001 Arabian Nights, from Canterbury Tales, and we filmed those, and it was so fun. Same thing, Miss Cunningham junior year, we did muckraking videos that I wrote and we filmed. Senior year, it wasn't English, although she was an English teacher, but she also taught AP Psych, and she had us do, an extra credit video for AP Psych. So I remember all these teachers, and I appreciated those creative outlets that I got as a, future writer, future author. But then I also had, and this is why I wrote the journalism book, or part of it, my journalism advisor was also our senior year English teacher, and she was not she wasn't a boon for our self-esteem. She really was very intense, very strict, very, I think in a lot of ways, looking back, like condescending to us. Mm-hmm. She was an older white teacher in a predominantly Mexican, somewhat East Asian school, and looking back, a lot of the things that she implied and held up as, classic or, proper were extremely discriminatory. And so that's why I'm writing this journalism book, and that I couldn't have a better antagonist. And it comes from my real life experience of this woman who sort of traumatized a lot of us. The reason this program was so cutthroat, the reason the book would be so cutthroat, is because of that environment that she fostered. And I do think it really pushed us to do very well, but there were also consequences to that. So just the idea that you can really impact a kid's life.
Yeah.
Yay. But also, be cautious about that.
For the listeners that are here, I think that there's so much self-doubt sometimes about, am I to this or to that? And to your point, for the very beginning of our interview, I think the vulnerability to just be yourself and to be honest about yourself and to reflect and to keep working and to keep growing. Mm-hmm. I think those are the two most important qualities a teacher can have. And I think that honesty is going to prevent, right, kind of getting stuck in a lane or stuck in a mindset that maybe at one point wasn't outwardly harmful, but then it becomes, right, over time if we don't evolve. And just checking in with ourselves is huge. But I know our teachers are so happy to hear from you, and we would love to hear from you on your next projects and with what you're working on. Maybe we should do a creative writing interview too. I got a lot of creative writing teachers here that are always looking for ideas. It's creative writing programs at the high school are really challenging because a lot of times they're either electives or they're only available 1 year. And like, what do you do with like one semester of creative writing when everyone has no experience and there's nowhere that they're necessarily going that you know of afterwards? It's tricky. So I'm happy for you and what you're doing at the university. Maybe you can help us at the high school level someday.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, no, this was great.
Awesome. All right. Well, Erin, tell everyone where they can find you. I found you on Instagram. You posted a reel, I think, joking about reading books that actually the characters go to Target. I was dying. That's when I immediately found you online and I messaged your publicist. I was like, I need to read this book and I need to talk to Erin. It was beautifully done. So where can people find you? Obviously Instagram, but share your handle and share where else we can find you.
So I'll say like most of my handles are Aaron H. Aceves. And then I think on Instagram, I'm just Aaron Aceves. So it's one of the two, usually everywhere. And then I'm on way too many things. I'm on all the things. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, YouTube, Tumblr. And it's all on my website. I think actually maybe my
MySpace. Yeah, your Zanga. Yeah. These are our millennial.
The funny thing is I never had a MySpace or a Zanga, but all my friends did. And I just I was never on AIM either. It was weird.
How could you live without being able to, cryptically tell your friends how you were feeling?
I was just reading books and I think I make up for it now. I think I do too much of that now for sure.
Yes. You're overcompensating for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm on all of those, but I think I have a website and it is just aaronhaceves.com. And you can email me there. You can see where to contact me on social media and everything. So it's all distilled there. But yeah.
Okay. Well, we're also going to put all that in the show notes. So listeners, if you head to the show notes today, you can find all that contact information there and a little recap of what we chatted about today. Erin, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciated your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad I posted that reel now.
Yeah, you should be. That's exactly how I found you. Thanks again for listening to Brave New Teaching.
We'd love to keep the conversation going over on Instagram.
And while you're there, check out the links in our bio for the most up-to-date events going on in Happy Hour and the Brave New Teaching community.
Thanks for being here and have a great week at school.